So welcome, I'm Ed Osborne, Chair of the Department of Visual Art. It's my pleasure to welcome you here to our second Visiting Artist Lecture of the 25-26 school year. Hope you're all having a wonderful October. And tonight I'm very happy to introduce Tammy Nguyen, a multidisciplinary artist who creates paintings, works on paper, unique artist books, publications, including her own imprint, Passenger Pigeon Press. In the densely layered space of her gorgeously intricate paintings, she intertwines geopolitical, environmental, and spiritual subjects. Before we go any further, I'd like to begin with a living land acknowledgement. Brown University is built on what is now called College Hill, part of the unceded ancestral homelands of the Narragansett Indian tribe. Indigenous people from many nations, near and far, live, study, and work in Providence today. The amplification of Native voices and histories is crucial to rectifying the many violent legacies of colonialism, and we gratefully acknowledge that the ongoing critical contributions of Indigenous people within this university and across our state, region, and nation. In addition, I would like to acknowledge that we are connected by a campus that relied on African slave trade in the Americas, and that there are buildings on campus constructed by enslaved people. We recognize that land acknowledgements are not a replacement for the necessarily decolonial work, but a reminder of place, of the legacies of dispossession and enslavement that sustained and enriched the stolen land that we are speaking from today. These acknowledgements and much more commit us to a lifetime of decolonial and anti-racist work. And now, I'd like to thank Heather Bandari for arranging Tammy's visit. Heather couldn't be with us today, as well as the visual arts staff members, Christine Dodd, Winnie Geyer, and CJ Liu, and Media Services for facilitating this evening's event. And a couple more things. First, please don't record this event. We value and respect the intellectual property of our visiting artists, and we will post our recording on our YouTube account with their permission. Still shots are great. Please tag Brown Visual Art and at Tamowhammo, that's Tammowhammo, if you want to post them online. Second, after Tammy's presentation, there'll be a Q&A. There are 2 microphones in the aisles, so just come on up to the mic if you have questions, and it's expected that everyone be kind, curious, and respectful in their questions, and just 1 question per person, please. And now, for our esteemed guest, Tammy Nguyen. Tammy was born in 1984 in San Francisco and currently based in Easton, Connecticut. She's a multimedia artist whose practice encompasses painting, drawing, printmaking, and bookmaking. Nguyen received the BFA from Cooper Union in 2007 and a Fulbright scholarship to study lacquer painting in Vietnam in 2008. Since earning her MFA from Yale in 2013, Nguyen has received numerous awards and had work exhibited at the ICA in Boston, the 12th Berlin Biennale, MOMA PS1, Philadelphia Museum of Art, among many others. Her work is included in the collections of the Hood Museum of Art at Dartmouth and the Museum of Fine Arts in Boston, and the Institute of, and at the ICA in Boston as well, among others. She's a professor at Wesleyan University. Anyone who saw Tammy's work at the ICA in Boston knows how absolutely stunning, detailed, and absorbing each piece is in person. It's a wonderful privilege to have her here talking about her work, so please join me in welcoming Tammy Nguyen to Brown University.
Look at that. Thank you so much. Thank you so much for welcoming me to Brown. You all are so lucky. You have such a wonderful school. It's also just it was so fun to hang out with some of the art students today, and then also just to walk around and to take it all in. I'm so excited to share some of my work with you. This is the inside of my studio from a few years ago. And I think what I'm going to try to broadly kind of bridge tonight is my ambition to create bridges across lines of thinking and across ways of telling stories. I frequently have this fantasy of being able to bridge the worlds of policy into poetry. Is it possible to read something that is meant for policy and to sort of stretch that into the realms of poetry? Is it possible to look at something that is factual, and to also hold that with something that is extremely visceral and abstract. So I'm going to talk about 3 exhibitions that occurred over the last 3 years. And these 3 exhibitions were all inspired by Dante's Divine Comedy. Every exhibition took one of the epics, and the epic would serve as a ground to kind of move forward from. The 3 exhibitions were titled in opposition to Divine Comedy. They were all called A Comedy for Mortals. It took place in Seoul, so this is the Inferno exhibition. Each exhibition was comprised of paintings and also artist books. I'm very interested in the question of reading. How does an audience read? How do you approach a work? What does it mean to read forward in time? What does it mean to flip back? What does it mean to look and then revisit? This is an install shot from the exhibition about purgatory in London. And this was the final exhibition that occurred over the summer, the Paradise Show that took place in New York City. I think overall, my practice is also a practice of pursuing nuance. I'm interested in the personal. I'm interested in cultural sort of movements. I'm interested in mythology, but I'm also interested in where science and faith grapple with each other. I'm interested in yesterday's news, and I'm also interested in ancient history. I try to, and I'm excited to be endlessly expansive. And I think that with all of my bodies of work, they're almost never conclusive. And to me, it seems like after I kind of dive in and exit a body of work, I'm more confused than when I began. So this is a view of my studio shot of that main painting being made. You know, I once heard this from a librarian. I feel like I've been repeating this over and over again at various talks, but I want to share it with you. This librarian, this artist book librarian at the Center for Book Arts once told me about how one might grow a pearl as an artist, as a researcher, as an intellectual. And what he said was, you know, you can read a book, then what you can do after that is that you can go into the footnotes, and then you can read all of those books. Then go into those books and then look at those footnotes and then read all of those books. And from there, from that way of burrowing into your interest, you are growing a pearl. And I think about that so often when I'm creating a large body of work. But that idea of growing a pearl with subject matter and inspiration also has an intimate relationship to materiality. So here's another studio shot of the Paradise Show being made. So that's like on the surfaces, that's that large painting being pulled apart, and that's actually how I navigate large paintings and stuff. You'll notice that everything looks really watery on the tables, on the sort of the flat surfaces. My paintings are all made with paper that has been laminated over flat surfaces. Everything I use is water-based material, so we're talking inks and watercolors, pastels, different kinds of gouaches and flash, silkscreen. There's a lot of gilding. I use an acrylic-based gilding size, and then there's also a bunch of hot stamping. These materials, I feel, are deeply rooted in the traditions of East Asian painting and then also illuminated manuscripts. And I feel that these materials have really been a way for me to develop a surface that I really am proud to call my own, and a surface by which I can really open up my maximalist enthusiasm for the entire world to see. So here's a painting of Dante and Virgil. This was from the first exhibition, which was sort of extending from Dante's Inferno. And one of the reasons, of many, many different reasons, why I was inspired to commit to a 3-year exploration of Dante's Divine Comedy was that when I first learned about it, I learned that Dante follows Virgil into the depths of hell. And Virgil was actually a pagan by Dante's Christian standards, and yet he serves as Dante's guide, this guide on this moral journey, seeking clarity and some kind of salvation and some kind of truth. And not only that, but Virgil was a pagan who knew that Christ was coming. And there was something about that, this orthodoxy, unorthodoxy, Dante seems to have a conviction on what is right and wrong, and yet all of his encounters, including his guide, are morally complex and morally ambiguous subjects who really blur the lines for me as to what is right and what is wrong, and what is truth and what is not. For me, when I'm creating my exhibitions, the metaphor is the constant agitator. The metaphor, like these worlds that I'm trying to bridge, these worlds that I'm trying to allude to, are constantly agitating. And I think that I try to make them agitate me as purposefully and sometimes almost as annoyingly as possible. And so when I was creating the Inferno exhibition, I thought that one way to start pursuing this exploration was to make my parameters up versus down. Up is down, right? And so as I thought about Dante and Virgil's descent into hell, I thought, why not make this a space story then? If they're going into hell, we're going to go up into space. And so this is just a close-up of one of the rocket ships. And these rocket ships were so cool. Maybe some of you guys play with this, but you know those like computer programs, and you just press enter endlessly, and they'll just give you another like warship or whatever. So there is this internet program where you just press enter and it would just give me another space rocket meant for war, this kind of fictive idea of space Star Wars, you know? So I would download a whole bunch of these and use them as a way to sort of describe my aspirations towards a hellish space. So the Inferno begins like this. Midway upon the journey of our life, I found myself within a dark forest, for the straightforward pathway had been lost. So already when Dante sets the scene for hell, he's establishing that hell is on earth, and I'm very excited and interested in this idea. I also learned that in thinking about rocket launches are best when they're launched as close to the equator as possible as a way to sort of take advantage of Earth's rotation. And because of this fact and the way that I'm kind of creating this metaphoric landscape for myself to navigate, I started to think like, okay, so what if we make some of the places of this hell, of Tammy's hell, part of the tropics? Why don't we think about this as a Southeast Asian tropic, a Southeast Asian hell, a Southeast Asian history? And so that led me down to this other path of exploring the space race within the context of the Cold War. So many of the paintings that are in the Inferno show kind of collapse these many different histories. These histories of the space race, histories of the various proxy wars, and moments of civil strife in history during this very epic moment in humanity's history. So that painting, this painting that you're looking at here, this is a close-up of it. This is a painting of Madame Nhu. Madame Nhu was a notorious woman during the Vietnam War. A lot of people kind of regarded her as the de facto first lady of Vietnam, but she was actually the wife of the brother of the Southern president, Ngo Dinh Diem. And she was very outspoken against the U.S. And a lot of people feel that she kind of led the reasons for Ngo Dinh Diem's demise. She is here depicted as a harpy, and a harpy is this grotesque bird woman in the Inferno who inhabits the wood of suicides, where they feed on trees that are made up of the souls of people who took their own lives. And here, this is a painting of Cerberus, the three-headed dog who guards the third ring of hell, where the gluttons are just torn apart. But this image of the three-headed dog is actually based on another historical image about America during the time of the Cold War, where there was a lot of civil strife. This is an image that was made famous from the civil rights demonstrations in Birmingham, Alabama, where a police dog is attacking the high school student, Walter Gadsden. So here's the installation of the artist books amidst the flatworks. And there are 9 representing the 9 rings of hell. When they're closed, they look almost like half moons or half planets. And then when they're open, they open up almost like, I was thinking about the idea of like cracking open the sun, you know? And what does it mean to sort of split apart a planet when your hands are able to touch it and manipulate it in all these kinds of divisive ways? They use a plethora of different materials. Paper is marbled using suminagashi. They also use intaglio printing and photogravure and handset letterpress and silk screening, laser cutting and collage, and a whole bunch of other things. And they all move apart in all these different ways. I'm thinking about spaceships. I'm thinking about insects and beetles and all the spaces in between. In the 9 books, they all feature a different conflict in the Cold War. And then that conflict in the Cold War is combined with one stanza from the Inferno, which is then manipulated. So here's just a close-up of one. So here, all of the books feature these little newspaper clippings from Stars and Stripes. Stars and Stripes was this really cool newspaper that was distributed by the military, and it was the military that U.S. soldiers would read during the Vietnam War, and it was distributing out of Japan. And I went into the Stars and Stripes archives and downloaded every single thing that I could find that was about the space race. And then from those space race newspapers, I then extracted the other conflicts that were going on in the world at that time. So this particular book focused on the conflicts going on in the Congo after they gained independence in 1960 from Belgium. And then the photogravure image that you see is actually one of the rocket launches from Cape Canaveral. On another page, you can see here, this is about the riots in Birmingham, and then the handset type is actually showing one of the stanzas in Dante's Inferno. And this is where, like, I think materiality takes command of the narrative in a very strong way. So the letters are done through handset type. And then what I did was, as I printed the pages, I would take out the type. And so then my concrete poetry was in a way kind of like this dialogue with Dante, where I was taking out the lead type and then creating my own sentences with this kind of positive erasure. So here's an install photograph from the exhibition in London. So this one's about purgatory. And purgatory, so purgatory is Mount Purgatory, and it's a remarkable place. The poem opens up with Virgil and Dante finding themselves on the shores of this mountain island. And in the distance is a boat led by an angel carrying the souls from people who just came out of hell. And this painting here depicts Jesus bearing his cross in a boat, and this is kind of like my version of the waters that surround purgatory. But this image, though, actually comes from this series of gold statues that I saw depicting the Stations of the Cross on an island called Pulau Galang in Indonesia, where my parents were Vietnamese boat refugees. They were boat refugees in 1977 after fleeing the fall of Saigon in 1975. And in my art, I wanted to show you guys these paintings because, my interests over the years have been all over the place. But I think at the end of the day, it does circle back to this core question that I probably asked when I was a little child, which are the questions of who am I? Where am I from, and why do I think the way that I think? So like I said, purgatory is this mountain island that exists in between day and night. And it's a place of waiting. It's a place of waiting to be cleansed. It's a place of waiting to find clarity. And it's a way, it's a place of cleansing the soul to gain entrance into paradise. So here's a painting of Virgil. There's Virgil right there in the middle, and he's looking in the same direction of this dinosaur. There is this sort of ambition to thread the needle between an ancient idea of time and then Cold War and then into our present time. But the reference of the dinosaur isn't totally random. The dinosaur is this allusion to Godzilla. Since I'm talking a lot about the Cold War and this era that was so consequential to my upbringing in my life ultimately, I was thinking a lot about Godzilla because Godzilla was created in 1954 by Toho Film Studio as a way, you know, as a metaphor to deal with the nuclear destruction in Japan. So on the left is an image of Godzilla on set, actually, and there's my dinosaur. So Luna moths fly everywhere in purgatory, in my purgatory. Along with this idea of wanting to sort of thread together ancient time and Cold War time and present time, I also wanted to sort of collapse our understandings of micro and macro. And I wanted to find a way to, you know, to express and distill this constant simultaneity of night and day. And so I thought a lot about the Luna moth, this marvelous species of insect that thrives in the night, but it gravitates towards light. So down below is just a Luna moth in flight. And then up above is a close-up of the painting, and you'll see this motif recur over and over again throughout the paintings. Those little half circles up there are kind of like my way of describing this translucent Luna moth that flies in these semicircle formations all throughout the paintings. The Luna moth also kind of ties in nicely to Godzilla, where there was this one episode where Godzilla emerges to destroy the world, and Mothra is like this guardian of humanity who comes out and defends us. Up and down again. So up is down. Dante and Virgil ascent up the 7 crescents of Mount Purgatory, where at the top sits is the Garden of Eden. And I really wanted to explore this idea in the show too. So there's this kind of compositional strategy where symbols are stacked on top of each other, kind of thinking about the geological formations of a mountain, or the sort of the way that rocks would compress on top of each other. So what you're looking at here is a painting that is made out of an image of a Bernini statue that stands outside of the Vatican. The angel is holding a spear, so the photograph that was appropriated was taken from below the statue. Then that image was repeated over and over and over again to kind of mine the way that a mountain would form. For me, there was a particular mountain that I was thinking of. I was thinking a lot about this mountain. This is the Grasberg, and it was a massive mine in Indonesia, but this is on the Papua New Guinea side of Indonesia. And so we're kind of going back to this place where my parents were refugees again. In 1936, there was a Dutch geologist named Jean-Jacques Dozy who came across this grassy mountain and discovered these just insane mineral deposits. And he discovered that this Grasberg was actually dense with copper and gold. And so, of course, over the next decades, this mountain was completely depleted. And it was mined so much that at one point there was, I'm just going to read this from my notes. This is so crazy. It's 30 billion pounds of copper, 26 million ounces of gold, and 121 million ounces of silver. And just that idea of this kind of the epicness of the mineral deposit, and then looking at this and thinking about the sort of the epicness of human might and damage and extraction was just so profound to me that it kind of served as this great metaphor for exploring purgatory. So here's another install view of the London show. And you'll see that these two artworks for me kind of present different polarities. So just look at the paintings that are at the corner right there. And these are the two of them side by side. The one on the left is called The People of Asia Shall Never Forget. And then the one on the right is called Long Live and Prosper. The painting on the left is actually a depiction of the Chinese congregation at the Bandung Conference of 1955, when 29 Afro-Asian countries convened in Bandung, Indonesia, to imagine a world that was not aligned to the West. Together, they denounced colonialism, they denounced the atomic bomb, and they really wanted to imagine what self-determination means in this new age of newfound sovereignty. And then on the right, we've got this other pillar. We've got the pillar of the Great West, right? This painting is called Long Live and Prosper, and it depicts a Bernini statue depicting an angel. And there's a whole bunch of these that line the outside of the Vatican. And, you know, I wanted to put these two together because, you know, I'm thinking a lot about, you know, what does it take to create a world order? And when you agitate the world order, what happens to the people on the world? What happens to the various nations in times of sort of grappling with what an orthodoxy means, grappling with what a set of values mean, grappling with what the mission of a nation is? Here's another moment of the Luna moths. You'll see that the Luna moths here are part of this wild vegetation of purgatory. And here's the artist book of purgatory, and it's called Mine Purgatory. And it's basically a bunch of slipcases that are stacked on top of each other, and they all represent the 7 crescents of Mount Purgatory. When you open the codices, you'll find that they're all expandable concertinas. And they shift in different sizes. So even though the papers are the same in every single one, because the codices vary in sizes, the structure of every book and therefore the way in which the stories are told change. So that circle up there, that's actually a picture of the Grasberg mine seen from above, and that picture is taken by NASA. Throughout looking at these books, there's a lot of shifting of scale. I very much wanted to put us in the position of looking down below at the Grasberg. There's something kind of profound about looking at the Grasberg mine, and it looks like an oyster, right? And thinking about that and then being sort of submersed in this landscape where you're kind of like peeling away the layers of a mountain. So up there's another excerpt. That text that you see is actually part of the 1936 published paper that Dozy created demonstrating all of the mineral deposits in the Grasberg. And then down below, as you expand the accordion, I take excerpts from every opening speech in the Bandung Conference, kind of pushing that up against these depictions of angels guarding the West. There's a close-up of the paper. And then these images down here, these are images of all of the different preparations for the Bandung Conference. There's this beautiful documentary footage of all the people of Bandung cleaning the streets, bringing out beautiful clothes, and setting up this amazing conference welcoming these 29 congregations from around the world. And then down there, there's a little bit of handset type. And much like in Inferno, where I extract a stanza from the Inferno, this kind of functions in a similar way, but I take the canto where Virgil tells Dante what is the meaning of true love. And that canto is echoed throughout the seven crescents of Mount Purgatory. Then when you're down at the bottom of the book, you can take out that final codex, and there are the pictures of a crying Pieta. The crying Pieta in Dante's Divine Comedy is often blurred with Beatrice, his one true love, and so I kind of insert her everywhere that I can. The last book, though, is not an accordion. The last book, when you open it up, is actually a dinosaur foot. And this is a real dinosaur foot from around here, folks. There's a park called Dinosaur Park. You guys ever been there in Connecticut? They've got these big dinosaur footprints, and it's so cool. You can bring a 10-pound bag of plaster and cast the foot, and you can take it home and do whatever you want with it. And so I decided to do that and bring it home and make it the sort of conclusion of this artist book. So here's an install shot of the Paradise show at Lehman Maupin in New York that just closed over the summer. So it's funny. I was reading Dante as I was making the work, so I had no idea that this was going to happen. But Dante's journey into paradise is a space story. He goes into the planet. I was like, oh, you're so good, Tammy. I'm kidding. But it's a space story where he enters the celestial heavens and travels through all of these different planets and destinations in space. In space, he learns about faith. He learns about hope, charity, justice on all of these different planets and cosmic realms. This show of paintings was exhibited during the same time as this other exhibition. So this is how the artist books were displayed here. This is the Paradise book, and it was displayed alongside the Purgatory and Inferno books at the Cooper Union Library. So this is the Paradise book. It comes in 2 boxes. And this is called Paradise, the Bread of Angels. As Dante travels through the celestial heavens, it's often thought that his journey is a journey of obtaining endless knowledge. And that process of learning is like eating the bread of angels. And I thought that this idea was so beautiful. Just that idea that the closer and closer you get to your sort of spiritual clarity is kind of like a result of this learning experience. I just thought that was so just lovely, you know? This book has 11 codices, and they represent Dante's 11 destinations. I'm going to show you some of the content, and then I'm also going to weave it into the various paintings in the exhibition. So when you open up the box, this is how you would read the book. It can be viewed on this mirrored platform, which kind of describes Dante's celestial orbit. And then as you open the book actually opens up as a Pythagorean triangle, and you're able to read some of the content by looking into the mirrors. A lot of the ways in which Dante describes the celestial heavens is based on Plato's Timaeus, and so I started to use a lot of Plato's geometry and Timaeus's ideas of fractals and shapes as a way to describe the heavens. So you'll see this is like, some of the Platonic shapes. This is the handset type that is present in the Paradise book. And these are also stanzas, but they're kind of formed a little bit differently. I formed the stanzas in this grid of stars, but the way that this is read is actually inspired by those illuminated manuscripts that were made by monks in France in the 11th century. These illuminated manuscripts are amazing. You actually read them going from top down and then left right. So then as you read them, you're kind of making the sign of the cross. So this is the central painting of the Paradise show. And this painting is called Love, Justice, You Rulers of the Earth. And this is something that is spelled out by this great eagle that flies over the planet Jupiter. And this eagle is made up of all of the souls of the righteous leaders of the past. But if you look closely, there's this depiction of the volcano right there. So there's the 2 figures pointing upward, there's the volcano, and it's based off of that volcano. So when I was thinking about this idea of knowledge, this idea of obtaining great knowledge, I started to think about what represents mankind's greatest achievements in the context of knowledge. And I started to think a lot about nuclear war and about how much nuclear technology and space, which is kind of intertwined with nuclear technology, represents this pinnacle. But nuclear war and nuclear arms and nuclear technology is something that is, in a way it's simple, and in a way, it's profoundly abstract. You know, in a way, it's simple in that you understand the epic idea of destruction, but in a way it is so abstract because you cannot understand the idea of epic destruction. I started to read this book that Carl Sagan wrote about nuclear winter, and he describes this volcano that's depicted here in this painting and throughout many other paintings in this exhibition. And he talks about this volcano, which is called Mount Tambora, and in 1815, Mount Tambora, which is located in Indonesia, so we're back in Indonesia again, Mount Tambora erupts. And this volcano's eruption is so big that it casts this big sulfuric cloud over the entire planet. So much so that a year later, in 1816, Europe experiences famine, depression, people are dying of starvation and scurvy, and Mary Shelley runs away into the Alps to create Frankenstein. And it is Victor Frankenstein who represents us in My Paradise. And Victor Frankenstein creates out of a love for wanting to learn about the human soul, to learn about what it means to give life, right? It is Victor Frankenstein who creates this monster that is so dynamic and more powerful than mankind. And so in this exhibition, the monster that is made out of the love for knowledge by Victor Frankenstein is the nuclear bomb. So going back to this big painting, these two figures down here. This is a depiction of John F. Kennedy with one of his lead rocket scientists, Wernher von Braun, who was also a Nazi engineer and was requested by President Eisenhower to join the American space project. And this image is actually appropriated from another image of JFK and Wernher von Braun at Cape Canaveral. They're actually looking at a rocket launch right there. Over there in the artist books, I've included images from that amazing speech by JFK that we will go to the moon. And then down there is a pamphlet sort of introducing Dr. Wernher von Braun. And without von Braun, I don't think we would have made it to the moon. He was so instrumental in developing the Apollo mission. They're not looking at a rocket in this painting, though. They're looking at this. So if you take your eye and you kind of trace around at the little dotted line around that, you will be tracing the exact contour of Little Boy. Little Boy is the nuclear bomb that was dropped on Hiroshima by the United States in 1945. And inside of my rendering of Little Boy is the Virgin Mary and her son, Jesus Christ. It's an image of love, but it's also an image, much like the Bernini statues, that question, what is the West without Christianity? What is Christianity without the West? And then in the artist book, here are the notes of Robert Lewis, who was one of the pilots of the Enola Gay, the aircraft that dropped Little Boy onto Hiroshima. And these are some of the notes that he wrote in the hours leading up to the mission. There was one part of the notes that started out with, he just wrote down, briefing, meal at 1:30 a.m., and then as he continued writing, he wrote, Dear Mom and Dad. There are hundreds, if not thousands, of elements in all of my artwork, and they're repeated over and over and over and over again. So if you look carefully up close in the paintings, there are these typed sentences. Those are all sentences that were extracted from Eisenhower's farewell speech in 1961, warning the United States public of the military-industrial complex and its uses of rapid scientific advances. The particular quote that I'm going to read to you is this. And this was something that I thought really related to the ambitions of this show and really speaks to the times that we live in today. Today, the solitary inventor, tinkering in his shop, has been overshadowed by task forces of scientists in laboratories and testing fields. In the same fashion, the Free University, historically the fountainhead of new ideas and scientific discovery, has experienced a revolution in the conduct of research. So do you guys see those scribbles everywhere? They're drawn over and over and over again. The boat is a scribble, the arrow is a scribble, and those are all these different words. They say things like OAS, surveillance.
These are all of the doodles from JFK's notepad as he was negotiating the Cuban Missile Crisis. And when I saw this, I just thought, wow, like there's got to be a way to include that, this casual, ordinary way of doodling while you were negotiating, so that this thing that is so consequential for the history of all of us. That arrow in another part of the show is caught or is being thrown by the god Apollo. And the Greek god Apollo is this image that is invoked by Dante, and Dante calls to Apollo to inspire him to get through the celestial heavens. Oh, there's Apollo. Apollo is the god of beauty and art, and it really is really meaningful to think about how he is this inspiration for Dante. But when he's depicted here, he's actually depicted on top of Mount Tambora. And the plumes that are kind of swirling around him also kind of, from them emerge this image of another crying Pieta. So here's Dante. He's looking up at the sun, and there's this eagle, this great eagle of justice that brings in the sky. And then when you go in really, really close, these paintings are littered with these stamps, these stamps that read things like, you know, we're breathing again, we're breathing again. Thanks a lot, thanks a lot, thanks a lot. All of these sentences are, it's parts of the dialogue of the Apollo 11 mission. And I mean, I feel like there's just so many Easter eggs that were brought to me in the making of this show. One of the final sentences in the Apollo 11 mission as they were landing on our beautiful moon is, "The eagle has landed." And that's it. Thank you so much. And I'm happy to take any questions.
I am so enthralled by your Easter eggs, by your amount of research, the knowledge that you have, just every single thing that you think about and that you learn about and that you read about that goes into each individual piece that you make. How do you go about starting this kind of research? Is it like something that started as an individual interest in these historical events? Was it something that you started reading up on specifically for this really large years-long project? And like, how does that research kind of develop into the work that you're making while you're researching it?
Yeah, that's a great question. Thank you. So Noah's sitting there. I taught Noah when Noah was a freshman in high school. And one of Noah's other teachers is my really good friend, Jake. And Jake actually told me about Dante when I was a high school teacher. And Jake was just such a great teacher that he basically talked about how Dante's Inferno was like a metabolic process, and I was like, oh, that's so cool. One day I should read Dante, and it kind of started there. So, which is just to say that my process of research and my process of embracing subjects in my work, there is something that is very open, sometimes casual, and very much responsive to my friends and people that I care about. You know, so as I live through my life, I learn things from all of my friends and students and colleagues and other, you know, things that I listen to and stuff like that. And sometimes something catches, you know, and then they just kind of sit there in my mind until the opportunity arises. And I think the thing is that, you know, there's Dante, but I think Dante is like a way for me to explore other questions that I'm really asking. I'm asking a lot of questions about right and wrong. I'm asking a lot of questions about nation building. I'm asking questions about the formations of ideology. And Dante is like the vehicle. And so because he's like the vehicle that is a remarkable vehicle, dense with imagery and lush inspiration, there is a little bit of a why not aspect to the way that I approach it as well. When I began this exploration it was also my first engagement with Lehman Maupin. And Lehman Maupin has 3 different flagship galleries. And so structurally, I was kind of like, well, that would be interesting to play around with the structure of the gallery. And then from inside of Dante, everything had like a little bit of a stumble upon energy about it. You know, there's a lot of like, let's try this image, let's try that image. Why not that image? Let's put it all in the pot, you know? I was never really, I don't know, in my image making process, I feel like there's a moment where I start to let go about like the sort of significance of the symbol in culture, and then I just let the symbol kind of become something as I'm making it.
Hi, Tammy.
Hi.
I actually never got to introduce myself in the morning, but I'm Tammy, which I thought was funny. Thank you for your talk. Your work feels incredibly, like, fantastically maximalist, both like visually, historically, and conceptually, and yet it holds a lot of like intentionality and clarity. I feel like I'm someone who feels very like overwhelmed with my ideas and associations and how to bring it into my own art, and I'm curious as to how you navigate that richness in your own process of making art. Like, I see all this, like, you know, all your paintings, and like I just like so deeply want to know what your like sketchbooks look like. So how do you decide on like what to include and like what to exclude, and how do you keep yourself from getting lost in that richness? And I don't know, does your work feel cathartic to you? Like, I would just imagine that like if you have so many things and then you can finally pour it out into your painting, like, it must be a lot.
Yeah, so I wish I had a really awesome sketchbook. I don't. I have a book of lists. So I have like I do a lot of list making, and I feel like my sketch, like, so I kind of just do like little thumbnail sketches, you know, and then I do like digital sketches and things like that. My sketchbook, so when I'm getting ready to paint, what I often do is I'll make a list of steps, almost like navigating. The best way I can think of it is like how like an athlete would navigate an obstacle or something like that, whether it's like in like a sport or a presentation of athleticism or something like that. So I might write something like green leaves, purple stems, gold helicopters, go back, stars, you know, whatever, right? And that is just me kind of thinking through navigating a surface or an image area. And then when I go in to paint, it's almost like playing jazz or something. It's like you've rehearsed and now you're just kind of, you're gonna get in it, you know? With regards to how I hold a I mean, I don't even think I hold there's like more ideas that are like thrown out, guys. I mean, believe it or not. I jest, but I think that for me, I really mean it when I think that my materials and my tools are my guide. You know, I think that I'm so lucky that my materials have brought me to this place where I feel like I listen to them. I listen to the way that the brush wants to move. I kind of listen to the way that the viscosity of the paint wants to create a variety of marks. You know, I think a lot about how the paintings strive to create a sense of symphonic space where there's dissonance and there's harmony, and every mark has an energy of its own, kind of like how every instrument in an orchestra has an energy of its own, has a grammar of its own, and when it comes together, it creates a full picture, something that is reminiscent of a forest, a jungle. There's a maximal sensibility there, but you never You never think that something's unnecessary when you're walking in the woods, right? I think that the materials, like when I was talking about the paper, that's key. Paper has given me so much in this world. It's given me a space to create. It's given me a space to explore 1,000 things at the same time. And I think that as I've explored various applications of paper, I've been able to say more and more and more as I respect it and learn more from it every day.
I'm just gonna talk kind of loud. You opened your like presentation today speaking about how you thought about a viewer reading your piece, about how they would understand it and contextualize it within space and time if it moved forward or backward. And after your presentation now, seeing like the depth of research and thought and contextualization that goes into it, is there an expectation that the reader or the viewer is able to metabolize and understand all this upon viewing it? Is it in an artist's note? And if not, how do you feel about your work standing removed from that context, or do you work to bring that context to the viewer?
Yeah, that's such a great question. I feel like, okay, so let's go back to the forest. I do think that I'm creating a type of a forest. And, you know, when you walk through a wood, you can elect to learn about every species of plant that there's in there in the day. In the moment that we're living in right now, you can choose to learn as much as you want about it and really be fulfilled in a certain way. And I also think that you can walk in that same wood and bring yourself, and you don't have to look up any leaf. You don't have to learn anything about that wood, its history or anything, and still be fulfilled. And I hope that my paintings offer that holistic kind of space where folks can enter in and out, enjoy themselves, and also elect to learn or not learn or share something else with someone else that's unrelated. They're really meant to be these experiences, you know. I know that there's a density of really specific information in it, and I don't expect anyone to really absorb all of that, but I'm so enthusiastic about all of that stuff. And so it's part of the engine, you know what I mean? Like without the thousands of references in it, I don't know if I would make the work that I make. So in many ways, it is my excitement in physical form, sharing with you these many different stories collapsed together in these exhibitions. Yeah.
Hi, Tammy. Thanks for the talk. I'm wondering if your Fulbright journey to learn about lacquer painting has any influence in how you layer your layering process.
I think in hindsight it does. You know, lacquer painting is so cool. Anybody ever do lacquer painting in here? It's awesome. It's I went to Vietnam to study lacquer painting in like 2007, right after I finished undergrad. And so lacquer painting starts out from a black surface. And the paint that they use in lacquer painting, it comes from like the sap of a tree. So that's like the binder, kind of like your linseed oil. And then you'd mix that into your pigment. And then the pigment gets applied to this black surface. And then the only way to get light, because the surface is black, is to apply gold and silver leaf, right? And then the other thing is that the paint like never dries, and so you have to humidify it. So the lacquer studios are like these big greenhouses, or like these humid bags where you put your painting in, and then you would take it out of the humidity bag, and then you'd have to sand it. And the goal of like a traditional lacquer painting surface is to get it as flat as possible and to allow the pigments to kind of float to the top. You know, so there's this kind of there's an archaeological dimension to this, and the way that one would achieve light is kind of through a backwards way of thinking about it. So you apply the light, and then you sand it back out, right? You bury it, and then you sand it back out. And when I was studying lacquer painting, I mean, it was a really interesting way of image making because you would constantly erase your image, you know? I don't know if I necessarily erase my image as a way of creating it, but certainly this pursuit of a flat surface where the surface is something that you view into to view it is very much, I think it does allude to those studies in lacquer painting, which is just such a remarkable tradition. Yeah. Thank you. Those are great questions. Thank you so much, everyone. Thank you so much for coming.